What's up everybody, I'm Adam, you're watching the Model Aviator channel, and this week we've got something a little bit different for you. We're going to be reviewing the Kavan RC Pilatus PC-6 Porter. The full-scale Porter is a super powerful turboprop utility / bush plane that operates out of some of the most remote and rugged areas on the planet. Very impressive airplane in full-scale trim and a very neat and unique airplane to model. When it comes to Kavan RC, some of you may not have heard of them. They are a company from the Czech Republic, and there's only one place that imports Kavan to the States, and that is FPV Builds RC out of New York. Anthony and his wife Jackie have got a great business going there. Obviously, they import Kavan. They have other name brand airplanes, that brands you don't see just everywhere. They also have a lot of other RC products. They've got some good deals going for the holidays, and they have a pretty cool business going. Now, they're really interested in getting the Kavan name out there and making it more well known stateside. We'll be reviewing this Porter. Heidi is going to get me the Norden from them for Christmas, so I'm looking forward to reviewing that. We may do something else from Kavan later on, who knows, but we're happy to help them get the word out on this. We'll put a link in the description where you can check out FPV Builds RC and see what Anthony and Jackie are up to, so check them out. When it comes to the model assembly, the Porter is not difficult to get together per se, but there's more to this than some of the bind and fly things you see nowadays that make it so easy you can do a genie blink and, have an airplane together. This one took me about an hour to get together, but bear in mind that includes programming my transmitter, installing my receiver, and having to stop at each step to take pictures for the assembly of this video. So it's really not bad. If I didn't have to do all that, it's probably a half an hour just to get the airplane itself together. Now, there's a little bit of gluing involved. The manual does a really good job of both describing and providing illustrations for each step of the assembly. It's very easy to understand, but there's one little caveat to this manual. Like a lot of manuals that are written in a foreign country, this one is written in several different languages, and there's only one set of illustrations. So just FYI, the English instructions or the descriptions start on page 3. The illustrations don't start until page 9, so they're separated a bit from each other, but it's not hard to go back and forth and figure out what you're doing. You'd figure that out yourself, but we figured we'd make it easy on you. There are a few more parts involved with this one than some, but still a pretty low part count considering. We started with the main landing gear. There are 2 slots close together underneath the fuse with some rotating tabs. You'll slide your one-piece landing gear into place. There are 2 plastic tabs that slide down into the slot over the gear. You want to slide those in with the notch facing the top. When you get those flush, you can loosen the screw on the rotating tabs, rotate those into place, and tighten them back down. Next, we installed our main gear suspension struts. You use a single screw at the top of the fuse just forward of the cockpit, and 1 screw down at the bottom on the gear block on each side. Then we moved on to our vertical. You want to make sure that you score and sand the portion of the vertical that is going to go into the fuse. You glue this, so you want to make sure that you test fit it and sand and score where necessary. You'll plug the rudder up. When you push it down into place and glue it, make sure that you're mindful of the wire coming out of the rudder that goes through this hole for the tail wheel. The horizontal will slide into place. You'll secure it with a single aluminum bolt from underneath. Next, we installed our tail wheel assembly. Notice there are 2 tiller arms and a wheel collar. Both the tiller arms and the wheel collar tighten down with grub screws that are already in them. You want to slide a tiller arm down on the bottom of the tail wheel wire, slide the tail wheel wire into the tail wheel bracket at the back of the fuse underneath, and then bring the wheel collar down on top of that wire to secure it into place. Next, you'll install your push rod into the very end of that tiller arm, install the other tiller arm into the other end of that push rod, and then install that onto the wire that you had to be mindful of coming off the rudder when you installed the vertical. Once you tighten all that down, you're good to go. You can't install that push rod if you have both tiller arms already secured in place. That's why you have to put that on first. Before you install the wing, you're going to want to install your receiver of choice down in the cavity in the fuse where the wing goes, there are some connections coming off of a main board that you plug into your receiver there. The wings utilize a single carbon spar. You want to slide the two wing halves onto that spar. Be mindful of your multi-pin connector wires. Those multi-pins plug into multi-pin plugs on the main board inside the fuse. Once you plug those in, you'll use two tabs for the front of the wing, bring the rear down, and you'll use a plastic Kavan bracket and two large aluminum bolts to install the wings. The wing struts install with cotter pins on both the wing and the fuse. So there are a few things we want to go over when it comes to the assembly. Anthony was right up front and completely honest with us when we ordered this airplane. He said that some of the wing strut brackets that are glued into the wing apparently did not get glued well enough at the factory, and that you need to pull those free if they're loose and then re-glue them. I tugged on it a little bit and they seemed okay, so I went with it on my first flight. Sure enough, they came loose. So we re-glued those with foam tack, so you definitely want to check on those and give them more than just a little firm tug. If you're doing aerobatics with this thing, it's going to put some flight pressure on it, and they will come loose if you don't re-glue those. The second thing that we ran into when it comes to installing our vertical, the connection to the extension was not right there in the hole where we can get a hold of it. Maybe they're supposed to tape that in place at the factory, and maybe they just didn't on this one, but that was kind of hung up inside the fuse in the back. If you turn the airplane over, there's a hole, it's a cooling vent in the fuse, and you can kind of see where the wiring is. If you have a problem and that extension is not there, you can use something like this little wire hook that I used to fish through that hole and pull that wire through. We had to do that on this particular one. And then the third thing is, when it comes to we mentioned bolts instead of screws to install the horizontal and the wing. We're not joking. These are 6 by 40 millimeter actual bolts. The instructions say they're 6 by 40 plastic bolts. Ours are aluminum. I'm not sure what that's about, but we got aluminum ones with ours. They have some finger grooves to finger tighten these things, but the way that they go into place, you can't get your fingers on it. You're going to have some sort of Allen wrench to do that. I've got a ton of driver sets, nothing in the shop here big enough for this, so I had to go to my toolbox for working on cars to get an Allen wrench large enough to go in there. So just know you're going to need a pretty large Allen wrench to tighten these down. The Porter has a 59-inch wingspan. It's 43.8 inches long. Our example weighs 3 pounds, 7.7 ounces, ready to fly with a 4S 2200. It has a 750 kV motor, a 40 amp ESC, 9-gram servos, and is intended for 4S 2600 to 3300 4S packs. With a 1.5 meter wingspan, the Porter is larger than a park flyer, and it's a bit above the minimum weight for a park flyer, so it'd be right at home at a sanctioned flying field. That said, this airplane flies very slow, very well, and it would be also right at home at a park or a schoolyard. Now, Kavan sells this airplane. They call it an ARF. It isn't really what we would call an ARF. We consider an ARF an airframe that doesn't have any electronics in it. What we would call this is a plug and play. All the electronics come installed, the servos, the motor, the ESC. The only thing you need is to decide what radio protocol you're going to use and install your receiver of choice yourself. So technically, this is actually a plug and play is the way they sell it, even though they call it an ARF. It is a 5-channel airplane out of the box. You have elevator, rudder with a steerable tail wheel, ailerons, flaps, and of course throttle control. If you decide to use a stabilizer, depending upon which one you use, you may have to add a 6-channel to switch between the modes on that. When it comes to fit and finish, there are certain brands that we're all so familiar with. We know what to expect. They're consistent. And so there's not really a need to go over that in reviews. Since this is the first Kavan that we have experience with, and we know a lot of people, at least stateside, don't have any more experience with them than we do, we are going to touch a little more on that with this one today. This is a very good mold. It's EPO foam. The cells are pretty tight. This is not the best, the most refined mold that I've ever seen, but it is very good. It is a high quality mold, I would say well above average. When it comes to the paintwork is done well. The decals are done well, and the decals that have a clear backing, like the Kavan on the wings or the Kavan RC, maybe the PC-6 on the tail, they've minimized that quite a bit by doing an overall gloss clear coat on the entire airplane after it gets decaled. So a lot of that stuff blends in and looks more like paint than decals, so that's really good. So fit, finish, and mold, we would say, is very good in the case of Kavan. Now, the one thing about this that I will say, not all EPO is created equal. This airframe has some carbon reinforcement throughout. I'm not sure what they did, but this is a very light airplane for its size. 1.5 meter wingspan. You put a battery in it, get it ready to fly. When I picked it up, I just expected there to be more of it. Very light wing loading. That's a good thing. That translates in the flying. We'll talk about that in a bit. Kavan's added some scale details here and there on the Porter. You have a scale through-bladed prop with an aluminum spinner. There are panel lines molded in as well as corrugation molded into all the control surfaces. You have antennas and the scale fences on the empennage. And when it comes to the scale suspension struts, they do have a spring in there, so they do actually articulate, although I think most of the actual shock absorption is provided by the wire gear itself. But they certainly look the part, as do a full set of landing and navigation LED lights on the wings, and they are day bright, so they're very easy to see. It is a convenient top loader. You have a magnetic top hatch. I will say that the black paint around the hatch on the fuse does tend to chip. That's pretty common. It's a pretty easy fix. You touch it up with a black Sharpie and just use gloss clear Scotch tape to line that, and then you don't have to worry about the paint chipping, and the gloss tape blends right in with the gloss coat on the Porter. When it comes to room in the battery bay, Kavan says there's a lot of room in there. I would say, to be fair, by today's standards, this is not exactly a large battery bay, but it is certainly enough. You can easily get 2200 to 2600s in there, and if you want to go with the larger 3200 4-cell packs, you can get them in there, but you can't get them in there flat. You're going to have to put those in standing up, but you can get them in there, and you can get the strap over the top of them. So to be fair, you can use the largest packs in the recommended range. There is a float set available for the Porter that you can get through Anthony and Jackie at FPV Builds. And finally, when it comes to field assembly and disassembly, it's pretty simple. You pull one cotter pin from the wing struts on the wings, they'll fold in, 2 bolts, 2 multi-plugs, and that's it. You've got the wings off. Easy peasy. It makes storage and transport a piece of cake. When it comes to airplane setup, you're going to have to do the usual, making sure that your control surfaces are centered and things like that. And the manual does a good job of giving the usual information that we expect, and then some. They'll talk about CG, control throw suggestions, expo suggestions, but they add a bit more. The Porter, like a lot of high-wing STOL planes, really benefits from liberal use of the rudder and coordinated turns, and that's not something that every RC pilot's used to doing. So they make suggestions like aileron differential and mixes like an aileron to rudder mix to aid in things like that for pilots that need it. So really good job on the setup as far as the manual is concerned. Now, when it comes to being a plug and play, essentially, even though they call it an ARF, it is a plug and play because all the electronics are installed. You just have to install your receiver. We fly Spectrum, some of you know that. So we put an AR631 that we had laying around. It is the OG AS3X, and we program flight modes so that we have one setting where there is no stabilization and one setting where we have AS3X active. We tuned the AS3X specifically to the Porter, which was not difficult. And we're able to fly it both ways so we can report to you how it does both with and without a stabilizer. We're not using any mixes. I'm pretty used to airplanes like this and using the rudder, so we didn't need it, but it's good that the suggestions are there for people to do. When it comes to battery choice, we did fly it on a 3200 one time, and I found it to be pretty nose heavy with that battery. I prefer actually a lightweight 2200. It's a little bit below the suggested range, But I think it would take an even lighter battery than this. With a 2200 pushed as far back as we could get it, that's where we like the balance, and that's the balance that you're going to see on our setup page that's coming up next. And just know that at that balance point, a couple things. It didn't really affect the stall. Still a very docile stall. It doesn't even drop a wing dirty or clean. You'll see that in the flying. But it enables us to get the nose up, really take advantage of the ability of the airplane to get slow, which with a light wing loading, it is really good at that. We can get that nose up, and we had no problem doing the 3-point and really getting a good STOL landing out of it, whereas when we had the heavier pack, that's a pretty long nose. It's pretty far forward when you put something this heavy in there, and it made stuff like that a bit more difficult. So you can fly it on whatever you want. It'll fly fine, but we like the lighter packs and the CG we get with that. So with that, our setup page is next. You can pause that, take a look at all our settings and everything we did to make the airplane fly the way you're going to see it fly. If you want to do that with yours, you can. After that, we'll go right into the flight demo. Check that out. We'll meet you back here. We'll give you our final thoughts. Something I noticed about the ESC, and you may hear it from time to time throughout the demo, at times it sounds almost as if it's slightly out of time. It didn't affect performance at all. Anytime I pushed the throttle forward, it responded exactly the way I wanted it to, whether I was pushing the throttle up abruptly or slowly. So it literally had no effect on the performance at all. But in the manual, it does cover the instructions on how to get into the programming of the ESC and change the timing with stick movements on the transmitter if that's something that bothers you and you want to change it. This is going to be a full throttle pass. It's not a speed demon, but then again, it's a bush point. It's got plenty of power and plenty of vertical to aid in any kind of sport aerobatics that you want to do. To my surprise, it maintains knife edge very easily, and you could do that as far as you wanted to do it. When it comes to inverted flight, the Porter is very stable inverted. It doesn't take much down elevator to maintain it, and you don't have to be anywhere near full throttle or full speed to do it. It handles cross-control situations like flat turns and slips very well, very stable. The Porter's very stable with full flaps down, flies slowly very well. It's really easy to get on and off the ground in short order and in a short distance. And of course, for those takeoffs where scale is not what you're shooting for, there's plenty of power for stuff like that. If you really want to drop it in, the gear can handle it, and that really shortens your landing distance. Here we're going to do a clean 1G stall. Just drops the nose straight forward. Very easy recovery, doesn't drop a wing. Now we're going to put full flaps down and do the same thing dirty, coming the other way. We get the same result. Just drops the nose straight down and doesn't drop a wing. This one's going to be fun to do some bush flying with. We know some of you are going to want to see it operate off pavement, so we understand. If it ain't on video, it didn't happen, right? And here's a super short takeoff and a super short landing into a little bit of a headwind. The Porter flew great, very impressed with it. It is very capable as a sport aerobatic plane if that is how you want to fly it. It's not the most aggressive sport aerobatic bush plane I've ever flown, but certainly capable enough. When it comes to flying as a bush plane and doing STOL work, very lightweight, light wing loading, flies super good, very docile stall characteristic with a lightweight battery all the way back. That CG makes this airplane really easy to get that nose up, get a super slow landing with a very short run out. And if you get a little headwind, you could just about bring this thing down like a helicopter. So really impressed with it there. Now when it comes to flying it with or without a stabilizer, the airplane absolutely does not need one. It flies just fine. You can set it up to fly well without a stabilizer, but a good stabilizer like AS3X or AS3X Plus is going to do exactly what you would think it would do. It will refine the experience. It will just be more of all the good things that it is. And then when the wind picks up, you will notice a really big difference then and be glad that you have it. Now, as far as skill level is concerned, while I think with the right receiver, the right modes, maybe an instructor, you can use this as a first airplane, I do think it's better suited as a second airplane because it does require some pretty big use of the rudder and coordinated turns, and that's something that brand new pilots don't do very well, and it just makes learning and getting around the sky harder. I think something like an Aeroscout or something like that is probably better as a first plane. This would make a great second airplane, teach you how to utilize flaps, teach you how to fly stuff super slow, teach you how to handle a tail dragger. It can provide all those things as a second airplane for somebody looking for that. And of course, if you're an experienced pilot, you can have fun with anything. I think if you are into bush planes, you're immensely going to enjoy this one. When you take a look at the price, it does seem like that's a really premium price point for a 1.5 meter foam bush plane. But when you take a look at the features this airplane has, and you consider where they're importing it from, I mean, we're talking about this thing's coming from the Czech Republic. I don't know of any other RC planes being imported to the States from there. You've got customs fees, shipping, all kinds of things that you have to factor in. You also have to think about the fact that when you buy this from FPV Builds RC, from Anthony and Jackie stateside, that price includes taxes and shipping, so that's out the door when you look at that price. When you consider that, I don't think $439 is bad at all, and it is neat to get a company that makes some airplanes and some unique pieces that everybody else doesn't make. That's a good thing in my book. So if you would like to add one of these to your hangar, check out what Kavan makes. Check out FPV Builds RC. We'll put a link in the description. Anthony and Jackie are great folks. They're very customer service oriented, and they carry some cool stuff you're not going to see anywhere else, at least not in the States. So check them out. That's it for us. Happy flying. Take care of yourselves. We'll see you next week with something cool with wings.